Don't take it personal, Frank, but if a woman named Karen shows up at your door, just run. That was the very first piece of advice I got after moving in. My new neighbor, old Mr. Jenkins, with his suspenders hanging halfway off his shoulders, told me this while balancing a rusted rake like it was a cane. I laughed, thinking he was joking. Run? From what? Jehovah's Witnesses? Salespeople? He squinted at me like I hadn't been listening. No, son. From Karen. She thinks she runs this whole block. HOA this, HOA that. Even folks who don't live under her thumb, she still finds a way to squeeze. I shrugged it off. After all, Linda and I had just settled into our new house, a modest ranch-style place with faded green shutters and a creaky screen door. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. And most importantly, it wasn't in any HOA. That had been my golden rule when house hunting. No homeowners associations, no boards, no self-appointed tyrants. I'd spent my whole career taking orders. Retirement was supposed to be different. So when Jenkins gave his little speech, I chuckled and changed the subject. Well, I think we'll be just fine. We've got the lake, the pine trees, and peace and quiet. What could go wrong? Jenkins muttered something under his breath, shuffled off with his rake, and left me scratching my head. The truth was, I didn't believe him. I thought he was exaggerating, maybe spinning up a bit of local gossip to welcome the new guy. Every small town has its crank, right? I figured Karen was just that, an eccentric woman who complained about lawn lengths or barking dogs. I'd survived worse. For the first week, life seemed normal. I planted some tomatoes in raised beds out back, fixed the dock, and Linda decorated the living room with quilts she'd collected over the years. Evenings were filled with cicadas buzzing, the smell of grilled burgers, and the kind of silence you only get when you're miles from the interstate. One afternoon, our daughter Megan stopped by with her kids. They tumbled out of the minivan, yelling about who got to sleep in the top bunk. Megan gave me a hug and whispered, "Dad, you look happier than I've seen you in years." I grinned. Well, it's hard not to be. We finally escaped the rat race. But that night, as the kids played tag in the yard and fireflies blinked like little lanterns, I caught Jenkins watching from across the road. He leaned on that old rake, shaking his head slowly, like he already knew something I didn't. At the time, I thought he was just an oddball. Looking back, I should have paid more attention. Because within days, Karen was on my porch, holding a folder thick enough to choke a horse, sunglasses reflecting the sunset, and a smile sharp as a razor blade. That was the moment paradise started to crack. "Mr. Miller," I looked up from tightening a loose board on the porch rail. A shadow fell across the steps, and there she was, exactly as Jenkins had described, though somehow worse. Karen. She wore oversized black sunglasses, the kind you'd expect on a poker player or a celebrity trying not to be noticed. A white blouse stretched tight under a navy blue vest, embroidered with the letters HOA, clearly homemade, but she wore it like a badge of honor. Under her arm she clutched a thick folder, papers jutting out like a general's battle plan. "Yes," I said, standing. She flashed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Karen Wallace, president of the Lakeshore Homeowners Association. I'll need to have a quick word about your outstanding dues." I blinked. "My what?" "Dues," she repeated, sliding a paper from her folder with the precision of a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. "Annual assessment, plus late fees, plus penalties. Comes to," she flipped a page, $1,275. If you pay today, I can waive the processing charge." I laughed before I could stop myself. "That's a good one, but you've got the wrong house. We're not part of any HOA. Karen tilted her head, like I was a slow student. "Every house in this neighborhood is part of the association. That includes yours. It's in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Didn't your realtor explain?" I wiped my hands on my jeans. "No, because it's not true. I checked before we bought this place. We're outside your boundaries." Her smile thinned. She pushed the paper toward me anyway. "You might want to read this again. Rules are rules, and ignoring notices will only make things harder." Linda stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands on a dish towel. "What's going on?" "This lady says we owe HOA fees," I said. Linda frowned. "But we're not in an HOA." Karen's voice sharpened. "That's what everyone says at first, but whether you like the rules or not, you still have to follow them. And right now, you're delinquent. We'll need payment within 30 days. I could feel the absurdity of it rising in my chest, but there was also something chilling in her tone. This wasn't a neighborly chat. It was a demand. Look, I said firmly, I'm not paying a dime. Show me the official county map. Show me the legal documents. Until then, you can take that paper and... I stopped myself before saying something I'd regret. And leave it with me. Karen slid the paper onto the porch rail, tapped it with one manicured finger, and leaned in just enough for her perfume, sharp and powdery, to fill the air. Don't make this harder than it has to be, she said softly, as if delivering a threat disguised as advice. I always get compliance, one way or another. She turned, heels clicking against the concrete, and marched back down the driveway like a soldier retreating to reload. Linda stared after her. Well, she's a piece of work. I picked up the paper. It looked official at first glance. HOA letterhead, fine print, a signature that didn't mean anything. But when I squinted closer, I noticed typos, sloppy formatting, and a mailing address that didn't match any real office. Fake as a $3 bill, I muttered. Linda touched my arm. Do you think she's serious? Could she cause trouble? I looked toward the road where Karen's SUV disappeared in a spray of gravel. Oh, she's serious all right. Question is, serious enough to fight dirty? We stood there in silence for a moment, the cicadas buzzing in the trees, the lake glinting beyond the pines. I should have felt calm, but instead my stomach knotted. Jenkins's warning echoed in my ears. If Karen shows up, run. The problem was, I wasn't the running type. And something told me this was only the opening shot in a much bigger battle. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Karen's so-called notice spread out in front of me. Linda brought over 2 mugs of tea and set one by my elbow. You've been staring at that thing for an hour, she said gently. It's just paper, Frank. Throw it away. I shook my head. It's more than that. She didn't just drop this off. She delivered it like she owned the place, like she expected me to roll over and pay. Linda sipped her tea. Maybe she bullies everyone around here. Jenkins warned you, remember? Yeah, but Jenkins also thinks squirrels are plotting against him. I rubbed my forehead. Still, I can't shake the feeling she believes her own nonsense. I pulled out the thick manila folder where we'd kept all the closing documents on the house. Deed, title insurance, property map. I flipped through until I found the boundary lines. Clear as day, our lot sat outside the shaded HOA zone. The map even had a bold black line cutting us off from their jurisdiction. See this? I said, pointing. We're not in her HOA. We never were. Linda leaned closer. Then why is she coming after us? I shrugged. Money, control, maybe both. She sat back, eyes narrowing. Frank, what if she makes life miserable? What if she drags us into court, or worse? What if she tries to turn the neighbors against us? I wanted to reassure her, but truth be told, I had the same fears. Karen hadn't struck me as the type to back down gracefully. She struck me as the type to escalate. I'll check with the county tomorrow, I said finally. Just to be sure, we'll get an official statement, something in writing. If she comes back, I'll shove it under her nose. Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You've got that look in your eye again. The same one you had when you fought with the contractor who tried to overcharge us for the roof. I smiled weakly. And we won that one, didn't we? Yes, she said, but this time feels different. Later, after she'd gone to bed, I sat alone with the documents spread around me. The house creaked in the night breeze, the lake outside shimmering under the moonlight. On the counter, Karen's notice seemed to glow like a warning flare. The thing that nagged me most wasn't the fake legal jargon or the ridiculous fees. It was her parting words. I always get compliance, one way or another. I couldn't tell if it was bluster or a promise. Either way, I had a feeling we were about to find out. The next week, the letters started showing up. At first, it was just one, tucked neatly into our mailbox. White envelope, HOA letterhead, bold red stamp across the top, final notice. It looked official enough that Linda gasped when she opened it. Frank, look at this, she said, holding the paper as if it might burn her fingers. They've added another $100 in penalties. I snatched it from her. Same shoddy formatting, same typos, same bogus signature from Legal Affairs Division. Except this time, the return address was a P.O. box in town. I shook my head. This is garbage. She's just doubling down. But it didn't stop there. 2 days later, another letter arrived, thicker than before. Inside was a 3-page legal brief, complete with fake case numbers, warning that if payment wasn't made immediately, a lien could be placed on our property. "This looks serious," Linda whispered. "It's not," I insisted. "I've seen real legal documents. This is a cut-and-paste job, probably from a free template online." Still, I could see the worry etched in her face. And I'll admit, even for me, it was unsettling. Karen was trying to drown us in paper, betting that intimidation would work where facts didn't. Soon, I learned we weren't the only targets. While fixing the dock one evening, I struck up a conversation with a neighbor, Maria, who lived 2 houses down. She leaned close, her voice low, as if afraid Karen might hear. "Did you get one of those red letters too?" she asked. I nodded grimly. She sighed. "I paid mine. I couldn't afford the risk of a lien. I've got kids in college. I can't have a fight over property records." "Maria, there is no lien," I said firmly. "Karen's making this up. She doesn't even have a legal HOA anymore." Maria's eyes darted around nervously. "That may be true, but try telling that to the rest of the neighbors. People are scared, and she's convincing." Convincing, that was one word for it. A few days later, I saw her little volunteer patrol marching down the street. 3 middle-aged men in reflective vests, clipboards in hand, scribbling notes as if auditing the neighborhood. They stopped at driveways, peered into backyards, and occasionally knocked on doors. Some folks handed over envelopes of cash right there in the open. It was surreal, like watching a con job play out in broad daylight, with everyone too intimidated to call it out. One evening, Jenkins shuffled over with that rake of his. He waved a piece of paper like it was a white flag. "Got this today," he grumbled. "Says my shed's out of compliance and I owe $200. I read it. Same fake letterhead, same P.O. box, same Karen. "Don't pay it," I told him. He sighed. "Easier said than done. I'm 80 years old, Frank. Last thing I need is some court mess. Sometimes it's just easier to pay the witch and move on." That hit me harder than I expected. Karen wasn't just annoying. She was extorting people, preying on fear. That night, Linda found me pacing the kitchen. "Frank," she said softly, "you can't take on the whole neighborhood. This woman, she thrives on conflict. Maybe we should just ignore her." But ignoring bullies never worked. Not when I was a kid, not in my career, and certainly not now. "No," I said, stopping at the window where the moonlight spilled across the lake. "This isn't just about us. She's scamming everyone, and if we don't stop her, she'll keep doing it until half this street is paying tribute." I turned back to Linda, determination burning in my chest. "Tomorrow, I'm going down to the county clerk's office. I want proof in my hands. When she comes at us again, I'll be ready." It started with the vests. One Saturday morning, I stepped out to grab the newspaper and nearly tripped over a pair of orange traffic cones in my driveway. Beyond them stood 3 men I'd never seen before, wearing bright reflective vests with the letters HOA Compliance stenciled in crooked black spray paint. One of them held a clipboard. Another had a roll of yellow tape like the kind police use at crime scenes. "Morning," I said cautiously. The tallest one, a burly guy with a shaved head, gave me a curt nod. "Routine inspection." "Inspection?" I crossed my arms. "Of what exactly?" He gestured vaguely toward my house. "Property standards, drainage, paint compliance, lawn length." I almost laughed. "You do realize this house isn't in your HOA, right?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he scribbled something on his clipboard and waved to the others. Within seconds, they'd strung yellow tape across the end of my driveway and planted a sign that read, "Violation. HOA action required." Linda came out just in time to see it. "What on earth?" "Step back, ma'am," one of the men barked. "This area is under HOA review." That was enough. "Take your tape, your cones, and your phony badges," I snapped, yanking the sign out of the ground. "You've got no authority here. None." The shaved head guy smirked. "Tell it to Karen." Then they packed up and moved on, heading down the street like self-appointed deputies of some banana republic. By lunchtime, half the block had bright yellow tape flapping in the breeze. It didn't stop there. The next week, a brand new metal sign appeared at the entrance to our road. It looked almost official, painted green with white lettering. Lakeshore Estates, private HOA property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Of course, the road wasn't private. It was a county-maintained street paid for by taxpayers. But to an outsider, or even a nervous neighbor, it looked legitimate. Maria stopped by that evening, her voice trembling. "Frank, I don't know what's happening. Karen says if we don't comply, she'll tow cars and revoke dock access." I shook my head. She can't tow anything. And she doesn't own the docks. "Try telling that to people," Maria said. "Half the neighbors think she's the law." And in a way, that was the scariest part. It wasn't just the fake letters or the cones or the signs. It was how easily people surrendered. Folks I'd thought were sensible were handing over envelopes of cash, trimming their lawns to Karen's imaginary standards, and whispering about who might be next on her list. One evening, I caught Jenkins shaking his head at the spectacle of Karen's patrol marching down the street again. "Feels like we're living in a third-world country," he muttered. "Except instead of warlords, we got a lady in sunglasses with a clipboard." I couldn't help but agree. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the fake patrol disappear into the dusk, I realized something chilling. Karen wasn't just bluffing. She was building a system, a fake government with rules, enforcers, and punishments. And unless someone stopped her, she'd keep tightening the noose until every neighbor was trapped. I glanced at Linda, who sat quietly beside me, clutching her tea. "This isn't just about us anymore," I said. "This is about the whole neighborhood." And deep down, I knew exactly what I had to do. The county clerk's office wasn't exactly glamorous. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the whole place smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee. But I wasn't there for comfort. I was there for answers. The clerk, a woman in her 30s with horn-rimmed glasses and a polite but weary smile, looked up as I slid Karen's latest notice across the counter. "Ma'am," I began, "I need to know if this is legitimate." She adjusted her glasses, scanned the page, and frowned. "Who issued this?" "The Lakeshore Homeowners Association," I said, "or at least that's what it says." Her fingers flew over the keyboard, a few clicks, a pause, and then she tilted her head. "That's odd." My stomach tightened. "Odd how?" She swiveled the screen so I could see. The Lakeshore HOA was officially dissolved 8 years ago. Articles of dissolution filed right here. No legal standing since then. I blinked. 8 years? She nodded. "Looks like the original board voted to disband. They filed all the paperwork properly. The state recognized it. The IRS closed the account. It's gone. Legally dead." I leaned on the counter, letting out a low whistle. "Then what the hell is this woman doing collecting dues?" The clerk shrugged. "If she's still claiming authority, it's fraud. Plain and simple. Fraud." The word hit like a hammer. "Could I get a copy of those dissolution papers?" I asked. She printed a stack, stapled it neatly, and slid it toward me. "Here you go, official seals and all." I thanked her, but as I walked out with the papers under my arm, my mind was spinning. Karen wasn't just overzealous. She was running a full-on scam. She'd resurrected a corpse of an HOA and propped it up like a puppet to squeeze money out of frightened neighbors. Driving home, I couldn't help but replay her words. I always get compliance one way or another. Now I knew why she sounded so confident. Nobody had bothered to check. Nobody had called her bluff. Back at the house, Linda was waiting on the porch. "Well?" she asked anxiously. I dropped the papers into her hands. "Read the stamp at the bottom." She scanned it quickly, then looked up with wide eyes. "Dissolved? 8 years ago?" "Exactly. She's got no authority, none." Linda exhaled in relief, but I wasn't smiling. "The problem is, most of the neighbors don't know that, and Karen's been feeding them lies for so long they think she's the law." That evening, I spread the documents across the kitchen table, highlighting the dates and seals. Linda sat across from me, chewing her lip. "So what's next?" she asked. I tapped at the stack of papers. "Next, I confront her. No more dodging, no more pretending. She's running a scam, and it's time she got called out." Linda hesitated. "Frank, you sure that's safe? She doesn't strike me as the type to admit she's wrong. If anything, she'll lash out." I looked out the window toward the darkened road, where Karen's fake patrols had marched just nights ago. "That's exactly what I'm counting on," I said quietly. Because now, for the first time, I wasn't the one on the defensive. I had the truth, and the truth was about to hit Karen harder than any fine, fake, or otherwise. I didn't have to wait long for my chance. 2 days after my visit to the county clerk, Karen showed up again. Same sunglasses, same navy vest, same smug smile. Only this time, she brought backup. A wiry man with a clipboard who looked like he'd been recruited from the nearest bar. "Mr. Miller," she said sweetly, though her tone dripped with condescension. "We're here to deliver your final notice before legal action." I leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed. "Funny you should mention legal action," she blinked. "Excuse me?" I held up a stapled packet of papers and let it dangle in the air like bait. "Because according to the county, your HOA doesn't exist. Dissolved. Gone. 8 years ago." For the first time since I'd met her, Karen's smile faltered. Only for a second, but I caught it. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "We've been operating continuously. You must be mistaken." Not mistaken. I walked down the steps, closing the distance. "This is an official record, stamped, sealed, and filed. Your little association is legally dead, which means these notices," I flicked the packet of fake fines she'd left last week, "aren't worth the paper they're printed on." Her face flushed crimson. The man with the clipboard shifted uneasily, glancing at her like he hadn't signed up for this part. Karen jabbed a finger at me. "You think you can embarrass me? You think waving around a few sheets of paper changes the fact that this community needs order? This community doesn't need you," I shot back. "And you sure as hell don't get to extort money under a fake title." Her voice rose, shrill and sharp. "I am the president of this association. I make the rules and you will comply." By now, Linda had stepped out onto the porch, arms folded tightly. A few neighbors slowed their walks, lingering at the edges of their yards, pretending to water flowers while they listened. "Karen," Linda said firmly, "you need to leave. Right now." But Karen wasn't listening. She snatched the dissolution papers from my hand, scanned them quickly, and then tore them in half with a dramatic rip. "There," she hissed. "That's what I think of your so-called evidence." Gasps rippled from the neighbors watching. I bent down, picked up the shredded pieces, and smiled. "That's fine. I've got 10 more copies inside. You can rip paper all day, but you can't rip the truth." Karen's lips curled into a snarl. She snatched her folder from under her arm and clutched it like a shield. "You'll regret this," she spat. "Nobody defies the HOA and gets away with it. Nobody." Then she spun on her heel, barked at her clipboard lackey to follow, and stormed down the driveway. For a long moment, the street was silent. Finally, Jenkins called from across the road, his voice quavering but loud enough to carry. "Looks like you poked the hornet's nest, Frank." I gave a dry laugh, though inside I felt a knot forming in my gut. He was right. I had poked the hornet's nest. And judging by the look in Karen's eyes as she left, those hornets weren't done stinging. Linda touched my arm gently. "Frank, what if she gets nastier?" I exhaled slowly, watching Karen's SUV disappear around the bend. "Then we get nastier right back, but this time, we've got the law on our side." I said it with conviction, but deep down, I wasn't sure if the law would be enough. Because Karen wasn't just a bully with papers anymore. She was cornered. And cornered people are dangerous. I should have known Karen wouldn't lick her wounds in silence. 3 mornings later, I stepped out to get the newspaper and nearly tripped over a brand new wooden barricade stretched across the end of my driveway. A crude, hand-painted sign nailed to the front read, "HOA Delinquent. Do not trust." I just stood there, jaw hanging open. Linda came up behind me, coffee in hand, and nearly dropped her mug. "She didn't," Linda whispered. "Oh, she did," I muttered, yanking the sign to one side. It was heavy, nailed to a sawhorse. She had planned this. Before I could drag it out of the way, I heard the whine of that ridiculous golf cart. Here came Karen, rolling down the street like a queen on parade, sunglasses flashing in the early light. "Good morning, delinquent," she called out. Her voice rang like nails on a chalkboard. "Thought I'd save the neighbors the trouble of finding out what kind of people you really are." I clenched my fists. "Karen, this is harassment. Move your junk off my driveway before I call the county." She slowed to a crawl, parking her cart squarely in the middle of the street. A couple of dog walkers stopped nearby, pretending to fiddle with leashes as they watched. "You can call whoever you like," Karen sneered, "but everyone knows the truth. You moved in, refused to pay dues, and now you're freeloading off the rest of us. Linda stepped forward. That's a lie, and you know it. We're not even in your association. Karen smirked, pulling a clipboard from under her arm like it was Excalibur. These records say otherwise. She flipped through pages filled with what looked like names and numbers, clearly cobbled together. From across the road, I could see neighbor Tom squinting at the scene, his brow furrowed. Others were peeking from behind curtains. Everyone pays their fair share, Karen announced theatrically, except them. She jabbed her pen in our direction. And I won't let parasites drag down this community. The word parasites lit a fuse in my chest. I marched down the driveway until I was just feet from her cart. You listen to me. You can wave that fake clipboard all you want, but I've got the state records. I've got proof your so-called HOA is nothing but smoke. And if you don't remove that barricade right now, I'll file harassment charges before lunch. Karen leaned back, utterly unfazed. Big talk, Frank, but you'll see. People like me always win. People like you don't belong here. She revved the cart engine and took off, leaving the barricade where it was, dust swirling in her wake. By now, half a dozen neighbors had gathered in little knots along the street. Tom finally walked over, scratching his head. Frank, he said quietly, is it true about the HOA being dissolved? Yes, I said firmly. I've got the paperwork. This whole thing is a scam, and she knows it. Tom nodded slowly, clearly wrestling with the possibility. Behind him, Mrs. Jenkins whispered to her husband, both looking unsettled. That was when Linda whispered, she's trying to turn the neighborhood against us. And it was working. The more noise Karen made, the more people hesitated. Doubt was a powerful weapon. I spent the rest of the morning dragging the barricade into the garage as evidence. My hands trembled with rage, but I knew I couldn't lose my cool. If Karen wanted a war of perception, then we needed a different weapon. Facts, laid out in daylight. That evening, I made copies of the dissolution paperwork and slipped them into the mailboxes of every neighbor I knew. Linda drafted a short letter, calm and measured, explaining the truth. Our lot was never part of the HOA, and the association itself had been legally dead for years. By dusk, I saw porch lights flicking on across the street as envelopes were opened. Neighbors read in silence, some shaking their heads, some looking over at Karen's house. She must have noticed too, because around 9 o'clock, her SUV roared down the street. I peeked out the blinds and saw her marching up to Jenkins's porch, clipboard in hand, voice raised. The old couple shrank back inside, clearly overwhelmed. Frank, Linda whispered, this is spiraling. She's not stopping. I nodded grimly. No, she's doubling down, which means the next move is going to be worse. And I was right, because barricades and name-calling weren't the endgame. Karen had something bigger planned, and she was just getting started. It started with a knock at the door. Not Karen's shrill pounding this time. This was official, heavy, deliberate. I opened it to find 2 men in khaki uniforms, county code enforcement officers. One held a clipboard, the other a camera. Mr. Miller? The first asked. That's me, I said cautiously. He flipped through his papers. We've received a complaint from the Lakeshore Homeowners Association regarding multiple violations on your property, unauthorized structures, improper fencing, and unapproved exterior modifications. My blood ran cold. Linda came up behind me, whispering, "She actually did it." I forced a steady voice. "Gentlemen, the Lakeshore HOA was dissolved 8 years ago. I have the county records right here." The officer raised a brow. "We'll need to see those." I fetched the copies and laid them out on the porch table. He examined them carefully, frowning. "Well, this does appear legitimate, but I'll need to file a report. In the meantime, we're required to document the property." As they walked to the yard snapping photos, I could see Karen standing across the street, arms folded, sunglasses gleaming. She had called in the cavalry, and she was savoring every second. "Morning, officers," she called sweetly. "Make sure you get the shed out back. That was never approved." My fists clenched. "She doesn't have the right to direct you," I shouted across the street. Karen smirked. "I'm simply ensuring compliance. Someone has to maintain standards around here." The officers finished their inspection, clearly uncomfortable with the circus. One leaned in and whispered, "Off the record, sir. This looks like a neighbor dispute more than anything. but once a complaint's filed, we're obligated to follow procedure. I thanked him, though my jaw was tight. Procedure meant weeks of stress, paperwork, and hearings, all exactly what Karen wanted. That evening, letters started arriving in neighbors' mailboxes, glossy, printed flyers stamped with an official Lakeshore HOA logo. They listed violations around the neighborhood: peeling paint, garden gnomes, even the Jenkinses' rose trellis. At the bottom was Karen's name, signed in bold ink, claiming authority as president. "She's trying to drag everyone into this," Linda said, spreading the flyer on the kitchen table. "If she can't single us out, she'll weaponize fear against the whole street." The next day, at least 5 neighbors showed up on my porch. Tom was among them, holding his flyer like it was toxic. "Frank," he said nervously, "is this real? Because if it is, I can't afford fines right now. She says she's going to start putting liens on houses." I spread out the dissolution papers again, walking them through every detail. "It's a scam. She has no legal standing. She's bluffing." But I could see the doubt in their eyes. Karen's flyers looked polished, official. My photocopies felt flimsy in comparison. That night, Linda paced the living room. "She's winning the perception war, Frank. Even with the truth in our hands, people are scared of her threats." She was right. Fear was Karen's greatest weapon, and she wielded it with precision. Then came the final blow. A thick envelope arrived by certified mail, addressed to me. Inside was a letterhead stamped Lakeshore HOA Legal Department. It accused me of refusing dues, violating community bylaws, and threatened a lawsuit for damages exceeding $25,000. Linda gasped. "She's gone federal with it." I scanned the letter, my jaw tightening. The grammar was sloppy. The law office address was a P.O. box, but to an untrained eye it looked terrifying. "She forged this," I said flatly, "made up a whole legal department. But if the neighbors get these letters too," Linda's voice cracked, "they'll cave. They'll pay her just to make it stop." I slammed the papers on the table. "Not if I expose her first." That night, I called Deputy Harris, a friend from the sheriff's office. I explained everything: fake fines, barricades, harassment, now fabricated legal threats. He listened quietly, then said, "Frank, this isn't just harassment anymore. This is fraud and impersonation. If you've got evidence, bring it in. We'll build a case." For the first time, I felt the weight shift. Karen had pushed too far, and now the law itself was turning against her. Still, as I looked out the window at her house glowing under porch lights, I knew she wouldn't back down quietly. Because Karen wasn't just fighting for power, she was fighting to keep her scam alive. And desperate people. They're the most dangerous of all. Saturday evening, the community center parking lot was overflowing. Pickup trucks, sedans, even a few golf carts lined the gravel. Word had spread fast. Karen had called a mandatory HOA meeting to address non-compliant neighbors. I almost laughed at the audacity. A dissolved HOA holding a mandatory meeting, pure theater, but Linda insisted we show up. "If we stay home, she controls the narrative," she said. She was right. Inside, the room buzzed with low conversation. Folding chairs creaked as neighbors settled in. At the front stood Karen, flanked by her board, the clipboard guy, and 2 other volunteers who looked like they'd been dragged in last minute. Karen wore a navy blazer with a shiny pin that looked suspiciously like it came from a novelty shop. She clutched a thick binder under one arm like it contained the 10 Commandments. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice sugary sweet but loud enough to echo off the cinderblock walls. "As your HOA president, I've called this meeting to restore order and ensure our neighborhood maintains its standards." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jenkins leaned over to me and whispered, "She's laying it on thick tonight." Karen continued, flipping her binder open with a dramatic flourish. "Certain residents," her eyes darted straight at me, "have refused to pay their dues, violated multiple bylaws, and spread misinformation to sow division. Tonight, we will put an end to this." I rose slowly from my seat. "Funny you mention misinformation, Karen, because I brought a few documents myself." Gasps fluttered across the room. Karen stiffened. "You will sit down and wait your turn," she snapped. "Actually," I said calmly, "I think the neighbors deserve to hear this now." From my folder, I pulled the dissolution papers, crisp copies with the county seal glinting under the fluorescent lights. I held them high for all to see. This, I said, is the official record from the county clerk. The Lakeshore HOA was dissolved 8 years ago. Legally, it does not exist, which means Karen has no authority to collect dues, issue fines, or threaten lawsuits. The room erupted in whispers. People leaned forward, straining to see the seal. Karen's face turned beet red. "Lies!" she shrieked. "Fabricated lies! He printed those off the internet!" I stepped closer to the front, my voice steady. "Anyone who doubts me can request the same records directly from the county. They're public. All it takes is one phone call." Tom raised his hand timidly. "Karen, is that true? Was the HOA dissolved?" Karen's lips trembled. "Of course not. This neighborhood needs governance. Without me, it would fall into chaos." Linda spoke up from her seat. "Chaos? You mean the barricades you built? The flyers you mailed? The fake legal letters you sent out?" She held up the certified envelope we'd received, waving it like a flag. "This came from a P.O. box. There is no legal department." A collective murmur of anger spread through the crowd. Neighbors turned to one another, realization dawning. Karen slammed her binder shut. "Enough! I will not be slandered by freeloaders and liars. I am the president, and you will respect me." That was when the back doors opened. Deputy Harris and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their presence immediately silencing the room. "Evening, folks," Harris said, scanning the crowd. "We've received multiple complaints about harassment, fraud, and impersonation involving this so-called HOA. We're here to get to the bottom of it." Karen froze, her bravado cracking. "Deputy, this is all a misunderstanding. These people are simply angry because I enforce rules." Harris raised an eyebrow. "Rules from an HOA that hasn't existed in nearly a decade? Because that's what the county records say." Gasps again. Karen sputtered, "No, that can't be. Those records are wrong." I stepped forward, handing Harris the dissolution papers. "Here's your copy, Deputy, stamped and sealed." He examined them, nodded, then turned back to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, this association is not recognized by the county or the state. Any collection of dues or issuance of fines under its name is unlawful." The room broke into a roar, neighbors shouting, some furious, others relieved. Mrs. Jenkins dabbed her eyes with a tissue, muttering, "All those checks we paid her." Karen's composure shattered. She lunged for the binder, waving it wildly. "You don't understand. Without me, this neighborhood will collapse. I kept it together. I'm the only one who can." 2 officers moved quickly, steadying her arms. "Ma'am," one said firmly, "you're under investigation for fraud and harassment. You'll need to come with us." "No, you can't do this," Karen screamed as they guided her toward the door. Her sunglasses slipped from her face, clattering to the floor. For the first time, she looked small, cornered, desperate. As the doors closed behind her, the room let out a collective exhale. Neighbors gathered in clusters, shaking their heads, some angry, some embarrassed. Harris addressed us one last time. "If you've made payments to this woman under the pretense of HOA dues, please file a report with our office. We'll be working with the county attorney to determine restitution." With that, he left, and the crowd slowly dispersed into the night air. Linda slipped her hand into mine. "It's over," she whispered. I nodded, though my chest still thudded with adrenaline. "Yeah, but it's going to take a while for this neighborhood to heal." For the first time in weeks, though, I felt the weight lift. The scam was over. The truth had won. And Karen, HOA Karen, was finished. The neighborhood felt different the next morning. For weeks, Karen's shadow had stretched across every driveway, every mailbox, every whispered conversation. Now, her house sat dark and silent, her SUV gone, her precious golf cart parked crooked in the yard like a forgotten toy. Linda and I stood on the porch, sipping coffee, watching neighbors slowly trickle into the street. For the first time, people weren't avoiding each other. They were coming together. Tom crossed over, hands shoved in his pockets. "Guess we all owe you 2 an apology," he said sheepishly. "We should have believed you from the start." I waved him off. Karen had everyone fooled. She was loud, confident, and she made it sound official. That's how cons work. Mrs. Jenkins shuffled up next, clutching a folder of canceled checks. "Deputy Harris said we can submit claims for restitution. Do you really think we'll get any of it back?" "Maybe not all," I admitted, "but the investigation's in motion. That's more than we had last week." By midday, a group of us had gathered in front of the community center. Folding chairs were dragged back out, this time not for Karen's theatrics, but for an honest conversation. No binders, no fake titles, just neighbors trying to put things right. Tom cleared his throat. So, where do we go from here? Do we even want an HOA? The question hung in the air. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then Linda said softly, "What people wanted all along was fairness, transparency, not one person barking orders and pocketing cash." Heads nodded. Even Jenkins, usually the quietest, raised a hand. "If we do form something new, it has to be legal, open, and optional. No more scare tactics." Someone else chimed in. "Or maybe we don't need one at all. We managed before Karen showed up." The debate went on for an hour, but it was calm, respectful, exactly the opposite of Karen's rule. And though no final decision was made, it was clear one thing had changed. People were no longer afraid to speak up. That evening, the sheriff's office released a short statement. Karen was facing multiple charges: fraud, harassment, impersonation of a legal entity, and mail fraud for the flyers and fake legal letters. If convicted, she could see serious fines, and possibly time behind bars. When I read the statement aloud, Linda sighed in relief. She's finally gonna be held accountable. I nodded, but part of me still felt unsettled. Karen had ruled by intimidation, and the scars wouldn't vanish overnight. Neighbors had turned on each other, doubted each other. Rebuilding trust would take time. Still, there was hope. That night, Tom came by with a six-pack, and Jenkins brought over a plate of cookies. We sat on the porch, laughing for the first time in weeks. The barricades, the flyers, the threats, they already felt like ghosts fading into the past. Linda leaned against me, whispering, "See, the neighborhood's already healing." I smiled. Yeah, because the truth finally had its day. A week after Karen's arrest, the street felt almost unrecognizable. Kids were back riding bikes without being chased off the sidewalks. Jenkins tended his roses without fear of a violation notice taped to his door. Even Tom, usually gruff, waved every morning on his way to work. It struck me how quickly peace returned once the bully was gone. All it took was shining light on her lies. One evening, Linda and I sat on the porch watching the sun sink over the rooftops, the sky painted in soft pinks and oranges. She rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "It feels like our home again." "Yeah," I said quietly, sipping my coffee. Amazing what happens when fear gets kicked to the curb. The neighbors began organizing small things: potlucks, yard sales, even a block cleanup. No fines, no threats, no fake authority. Just people helping people. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The sheriff's office kept us updated. Karen had posted bail, but the mountain of charges meant her days of intimidation were over. The county attorney was already lining up witnesses, and from what I heard, plenty of neighbors were more than willing to testify. Sometimes, I'd catch myself wondering what drove her: power, money, maybe just the thrill of control. Whatever it was, it had cost her everything: her reputation, her freedom, and the neighborhood she claimed to protect. One Saturday, Jenkins stopped by with a smile. "Frank," he said, "a few of us are drafting a good neighbor agreement. Nothing binding, nothing scary, just a promise to look out for each other. Thought you and Linda might want to help." I couldn't help but grin. That sounds like the best contract I've heard in a long time. As the sun dipped lower, I thought back to the barricades, the fake fines, the shouting matches. It all seemed almost surreal now, like a bad dream that had finally ended. Karen had tried to rule through fear, but fear only lasts until the truth shows up. And the truth had shown up, stamped, sealed, and undeniable. That night, as porch lights flicked on across the street and laughter drifted from Jenkins's yard, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: pride. Not just in standing up to Karen, but in this neighborhood. We'd been tested, divided, almost broken, but in the end, we came out stronger. Linda squeezed my hand. "You know," she said, "someday we'll look back and laugh about all this." I chuckled. "Maybe, but for now, I'm just glad we can sit here in peace, without someone threatening us over mailbox paint." We both laughed, the sound carrying softly into the night. For the first time in months, the street felt quiet, safe, ours. And that was more valuable than any HOA rulebook could ever promise.